I'm going to start back again. Good evening and welcome to the Arundel Camera Club meeting for Thursday, September 15th. For our online people, my name is John Milleker and I'm the club president for the 2022-2023 season. And we were talking about how we're so happy that we're now continuing back in person online. And if you are local to Anne Arundel County, Maryland, please be sure to visit us at the beautiful Severna Park Baptist Church, located at 506 Benfield Road, Severna Park, Maryland. Before we move to tonight's program, do we have any announcements from our officers?
Where do you want it?
Wherever. You can grab the microphone, and Christine's going to check the audio for you there. We have Jackie.
All right, this is Jackie. I'm the Secretary-Treasurer. We have a change in how we are doing dues for competition. If you may no longer bring it to the meeting where the competition is being held, I must have it the Monday preceding a competition so that I have time to book it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Anybody else? Have anything from the MPA, or do you have something for a contest first, Ron?
I have a little bit of both. Let's talk about the contest here. Next week is our print and digital contest. So this will be in person. First time we've done this for about 2.5 years. So I hope everybody is working really hard to get the images. And keep in mind, that means 3 digital images, which you submit by Monday.
I think you mean color, right?
Color and mono print.
Well, we have digital, which we did last time. We sent them by computer, of course, online. However, the in-person ones, the color and the black and white, their prints, bring them in here, and we will be starting around 7. If you come a little bit early, we can make sure we get the stacks ready and we can go on time.
Perfect.
One other thing that I think for the MPA, remember, this is the deadline coming up in about 2 weeks for the MPA contest. And Fred's sitting here. Fred did really well in the last contest or so, and I think a couple others have done well too. No? Okay. But anyway, we generally have a pretty good showing in terms of those pictures coming in for it, but we also have a really good showing in the results. So I'd like to see the club continue to be represented well there. If you don't have the information, get in contact with me or go to the MPA website and you can see how to register there.
Okay. Do you have a question, Christine?
A question online asking if the prints need to be submitted online first and then brought in.
That was, since I made that comment, that probably confused it. No, do not submit them digitally first. We'll only look for the digital copies of the winners, I believe, after. We'll talk more about that.
Yes, and that's something that Mike always has us do. Make sure that when you print your images, hopefully you keep your files. Yeah. And that way, when you win, you can send that file over to our newsletter editor and he can get that wonderful image up there for you. Right. And the dues need to be in by the Monday at the latest in order to make sure you can submit. But bring your 3 color and your 3 black and white prints here next Thursday. Novice and unlimited. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Perfect. Any other business that we need to deal with? Okay. We have the schedule coming up is next week is our Still Life Talk. This week is our Still Life Talk by Christine. Next week is our print competition. What is next? What do we have for October? Well, actually, we have tabletop night on September 29th. And Christine has asked me if you were interested in bringing in lighting or goodies or something to help us set several stations up for the tabletop night. Please get in contact with her. And then we have plenty of space here to spread out and to bring some nice lighting setups. You guys all know tabletop night, but if anybody is not sure about it, contact Christine. If you want to help out, which we really appreciate, contact her as well so we can get that taken care of.
Also, if you want to do some for the contest, because that's how you her.
That's a good point.
So make sure, bring your stuff in and you got lights and they could use it.
Absolutely. What Fred was saying is to bring your goodies that you want to photograph for potentially the Still Life contest next month. And you're going to have a lot of opportunity to photograph them with several different and new lighting situations. Sounds good. I see we have 2 new members in the back. New members, do you want to introduce yourselves? Let's get you the microphone. or new visitors, I should say. Maybe we'll turn them into members by the end of the night.
Hello, my name is Jerry Savetic. I live here in Severna Park, and John is in my Toastmaster. He's a member of the same Toastmasters group that I'm in, and John told me about the photography club. I'm interested in photography, and so here I am. And my husband is with me.
Hi, my name's Jim Lochner. I'm Jerry's husband.
Excellent. Thank you both for coming.
There's some coffee and some water over there and some cookies, and you're welcome to it.
All kinds of goodies over there. Well, before we get, why don't we go ahead and get to the purpose for tonight. I've got to read her bio, and she wrote me actually, I think, did Mike write this bio for you? Mike wrote a fantastic bio because, of course, I'm very, very biased with Christine. So I'm going to read what Mike wrote. Christine has been our programs chair for the last few years and has given presentations on macro photography and cyanotypes in the past. Christine has always been interested in photography, but her skill really grew once she met John in the 2000s. John who? She has been a member of the Arundel Camera Club off and on since 2009. Along with her husband, John, she practices, teaches, and demonstrates almost every photographic process in history. Together, her and I, work in historic processes and digital photography. You can see Christine's work at johnmilleker.com/about Christine and listen to her and John discuss photography-related issues on our podcast, Under a Red Glow. That's a very nice write-up by Mike. So let's go ahead and get Christine set up. I'll give you your mic back. There you go. Probably made everybody deaf.
Check sound. Some people were saying it was spotty.
Okay, welcome, Christine.
Good evening. I am the programs chair of the club, so I really wanted a presentation given on still life since next month's theme for our contest is still life. So I hope I can impart a little bit of knowledge to you. This was a subject that I knew a little bit about. With John's help, I have done many still lifes over the years, and I'm hoping that maybe I can help you guys make good images for next month. Put my remote down. The first thing we need to talk about is what is the definition of a still life? It didn't turn. It didn't advance on the screen.
Come on now.
That's it. The Arundel Camera Club definition that Mike came up with for our website is a photograph of an inanimate object or group of objects arranged as the subject for a picture. It can serve as an exercise in skill and creativity to show an artist's understanding of composition, their ability to depict color harmony, form, texture, and the effects of light upon the objects. This is the definition that will be given to our judges, so keep that in mind when you make images. The best definition that I found that I liked, that I kind of modified to my own purposes, were works of art that focus on inanimate objects. First, you have to think about what is the goal of your photograph, and then you hope to make the ordinary interesting, and how. And I'm hoping tonight I can give you some insight in maybe how to do that. First, I wanted to talk about the history of the still life. Historically, painters were the first people to do still lifes, and half my pictures that I'm going to show you tonight were paintings from even as early as the 15 to 1600s, because they're available and they're easy for me to show you the thoughts and ideas on them. But the first thing I wanted to talk about is that within the paintings, objects had definitions, and they were called Veneta symbols, and they represented certain things. So the painters incorporated them when they were hired because the families that wanted these paintings wanted the picture to say something. Some examples, I'm not going to read all these to you. I will try to put my PowerPoint online at some point so that people can see all of these. But roses were a symbol that decay was inevitable. Books were a symbol that there was a futility to learning. Some of these were really depressing. I All of them seem to have these type of definitions. I guess in early Christianity, whenever you're dealing with the plagues of the time, it had a lot to do with where these meanings came from. So I'm assuming with what all these definitions mean and what I found them to mean, that's where a lot of this stuff came from. Cards and dice were about the squandering of the limited time we have in life. So it was, life is short, so don't squander it. And even some things had multiple symbols. The end of life was represented by snuffed candles, smoking pipes, or even oil lamps. And they were very commonly used around the plague. And knives were symbols that represented the divide between good and evil. The next thing I want to talk about is different compositions of still lifes. These are the historical ones that were used throughout history. I have about 8 of them we're going to talk about with pictures involved, so I'm going to kind of go through these 2 slides very quickly and get to the examples. The first one I wanted to talk about was horizontal composition, which is also called traditional still life. It's where the picture, where it kind of started and just moved across the image. Sometimes items were just lined up in a straight line. Sometimes they were staggered, but they're still horizontal. And you'll see throughout this that sometimes the composition definitions match multiple paintings. In a way, this also shows one of the ones we'll talk later because it shows more than one edge of the table. So you'll see that as we go through, and we'll explain more of this as we go. This could also be kind of the humped one because it curves, the curved composition, because it curves across the page and brings your eye around the whole photo. Another thing that I want to keep in mind is you can have small numbers to large numbers of items. Sometimes being cluttered was part of what they were looking for in the photographs. Sometimes they wanted it to be simple and it was just it's just one item that they're trying to bring to life. One of the things that you want to keep in mind whenever you're making photographs, which most of us in this room know about already, is the rule of odds. People like to see odd numbers of objects in pictures. For some reason, whenever there's an even number, we try to pair things up or put them together. The rule of odds help keep the objects separate, and it helps our mind and our psychology to keep in the whole painting and not just focused on the pairs. The next type of photograph is the vertical composition, which this is kind of vertical because it goes up and down. And we'll get into macro and some of those things later, which some people would not consider still life, but if you follow the direct definition, it does. But I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But this is vertical because it goes back into the photograph. It was often used to suggest higher purpose or personal growth whenever it was used historically back in the early times and in the paintings. Anyone have any comments to make about any of these paintings?
Yeah. Yeah, the one on our left over there, it really looks nice. I mean, the way they did the lighting, the way we're getting the shadows from the curves in the cloth, and just overall. Did you shoot that?
No, that's a classic painting.
Oh, okay.
That's from 1644 by
the lighting's beautiful.
By Peter Klaas.
Because like on that glass, I was thinking, I thought it was I guess that must be a window.
It's a painting. But as I said, a lot of these examples, if I have labeled on the bottom if it was a painting so that people are aware. The only ones not labeled are my own photographs. John also lent me a bunch of photographs for this, so you'll see his photos throughout, but I did label his.
Christine, I have a real quick question for actually more of a comment, but it's interesting where we have judges a lot of times talk about looking around the image. And kind of looking at that image, I see the bright rolls in the front, and then my eye goes back to that black, what is that? A cauldron of something. But my eyes go back to that black, and then my brain kind of flips up and down and up and down. It doesn't go in one direction, but that's very vertical as well to my mind. So I think that's really something important for people for as photographers to look at, because they've always heard how composition can move your eye around a frame, and it's moving my eye vertically. It's interesting.
And that's why I thought this was a perfect example. I admit I had to hunt for photos that I thought met these definitions. So I'm open to input from anyone as to whether you think they meet the definitions or not. But to me, these were examples that I thought met that. Go ahead, JC.
Yeah, Chris, how would you distinguish between still life and product photography?
Product is a type of still life, and that we're going into that later.
Okay, thank you.
It is a type of still life.
And one more question. The distinguish between contemporary and traditional. Do you have any photos for contemporary versus the old traditional?
Mixed throughout the program, I have contemporary, which are my photos, and the Renaissance. I mean, I even have, 1644. I'd say that's pretty historical to go to the background.
Most of the old historical, most of the old traditional stuff is mostly painting, but we didn't have cameras back in those days.
Correct.
So we got into more contemporary, started having the cameras, and it became a little bit more like product photography more than traditional still life photography.
Yes, as JC was saying, since he put the mic down, that as time went on, these were paintings originally because they had no way to capture the images and keep the images together. They knew really early on that silver darkened in the presence of UV light. They just didn't know how to stop that. And I don't know how early that was that started being done. I'll go to my expert over here on that.
That was kind of like the mid 1700s where they realized it. And then we had a lot of artists working in it, and it wasn't until early kind of 1820s, 1830s where we were able to really kind of harness that in.
And talking more about the history, they knew really early on that you could use camera obscura to make landscapes and such, but that's not this talk. But Renaissance, there were scenes that they could prove probably were made by artists using camera obscura or mirrors to trace what was outside their windows, because they knew that was because it's too exact. There's no way someone would have been able to capture the scene down to the T as closely.
Now, what do you mean by camera obscura? And in addition to compositional things we've pulled in from a lot of these Renaissance painters, what are some of the other things that we've pulled in?
Some of the lighting techniques we use, using I'm trying to get the name of the Rembrandt lighting. Whenever you have portraiture and you have that triangle of a shadow next to the nose, that's some of the things we brought in from paintings. Historically, lighting hasn't changed through the centuries. It's still, John likes to say that we're all experts in lighting because we all see sunlight fall outside. We all know that when it's a cloudy day, that's a giant softbox and makes the shadows less sharp. And we're going to go into lighting also later on. But those are some of the things that help make still lifes and how you can make them your own and how you can help enhance your photographs, is to think about the type of lighting you have, think about the direction of the lighting. And we're going to go into that more. The next, whoops, I went too far. Vertical, flat, yes, sorry. The next type of composition is flat. It is still simple, and the composition is items just laid out in a flat type. They often used like ribbons and bands to hold things together or lay things out. And these are both very classical, 1731 1737 and 1888. These are some examples of the flat composition. A modern example that you may want to use that a lot of people are doing is to take deconstructed recipes. Take all the ingredients that you put into a recipe and lay it out flat and photograph it from above. And that's one of the things we can do modern that is being seen very commonly. The next type of composition is crossed. This is 2 rows of items that kind of make a cross in the middle. Usually there's some sort of diagonal, so this was perfect because you have the diagonal here and you have the diagonal here. So you have a cross in the center of the photo of the picture. Here, I thought this was a perfect X because you have this line coming up here and this line coming down here. So to me, that was a very crossed composition because it's so symmetrical. There are other items in those lines, but you're pulled into that X in the center of the composition. Anyone else have any input on these? The next thing, and I brought this up earlier, angled composition. Traditionally, the first still lifes were all the front of a table facing into the table, and you'd see the things lined up or going vertical back on it. Angled is when you started to see edges of, at least 2 edges of the table. And it was very common, it kind of came into play during the Impressionistic era. So you have a very impressionistic photo here where you actually see all 4 edges of the table in this painting, but this is the more traditional with the 2 edges. And one other thing that you can look at on these photographs, and Jackie was telling us about it earlier, is to take the tablecloth and pull it over the edge. People would push things to the edge to make it more 3D, to have it overlay the edge of the table. And some of them probably were teetering or about to fall off whenever they were making their paintings and such. But it helps make more dimension into your still lifes. You see how this plate is over the edge of the table. That's one of the things I was reading about for photographs and for the paintings of the early eras. We talked a little bit about the curved composition. You have the circling around and you can follow, and it kind of pulls your eye through the entire photograph and brings you back to the beginning. But you kind of, in this one, have 2 because you have the one above, but John had pointed out to me that you kind of have the one underneath too, and you can follow it around this way also. But you have the curves that help pull your eye around the entire photograph.
The lighting too.
The lighting too. You have the darkness over here and the light over here, and you follow it through. Some of the picture examples I saw were skulls or things building up, or lines of bottles that you kind of build up and then bring back down. But they were copyrighted images, so I couldn't use those. But those were some ideas that you could use. You just don't want to make it too symmetric unless that's what you're looking for in your still life. Having it go to the 2/3 and down, like the one like this one, how it kind of curves, but that can kind of, you still have the curvature, but it's not as symmetric as the one I used in the example, but it also still gives you that curved and pulls you around in the photograph.
Which slide do you want? You want to go back?
Can you show one line? Oh wait, you did go back. Mm-hmm. Okay. Move on. The next one is enclosed composition. Nowadays, you can take a shadow box and put items in it to have enclosed, but it gives you a border. And you can come outside that border. There were even paintings that had a painted border on it that had items overflow the edge of that. But this just helps contain it, but windows can work well for this, doors. put your item inside. Flower bouquets in windows work really well for the enclosed composition. And this is a perfect example of going outside the traditional sizes. This works really well, even though it's not a 5 by 7, 8 by 10, 11 by 14. And so you don't have to keep within the standards, but just know that if you do that for our competition, if it's not a digital, you're gonna have to find a way to frame it, to board it that, enhances your photograph and doesn't detract from it. Another example of the enclosed actually was on the flat composition, because the violin and the door is kind of your enclosed, but there's also a painted frame on this that helps show you the enclosed. I noticed that when I was reviewing it later, I was like, oh wait, there's another one. And then the last one is the connected composition. To me, this was connected because you have your two bright items, but you have the green theme going throughout, but you also have the brown over here and the brown over here. So you have different things that point to other parts of the painting that pair it up. You can do this with colors. You can do this with texture. You can do it with materials. Maybe you have sizes that pair up at different spots, or even shapes. So there are different things that you can use to connect different parts of the painting together, or the picture.
I also see a lot.
Sorry.
I see a lot of parallel lines, Baroque lines going from your left to your right. So you're starting up with the fruit. You've got 4 different patterns of fruit going that way, and then you've broken it up with another bunch of parallel lines hitting you on the other side. And then you have 2 parallel structures, your vase and your goblet.
I kind of see a cross in this also. You have this cross and then you have this cross. So
Yeah,
as I
you've gotten
said,
like one of the bigger compositions that way.
So as I said, a lot of these compositions can be intermixed with each other so that you can make it your own, or add interest to your photograph by having, but don't go overboard. Don't try to put all 8 of them in the same. I don't think that would work very well. The next thing I'm going to talk about is arrangements and other parts of composition other than the basic form of the composition. One item versus several or many. The form, you want to make sure that it looks well. The things that can help you with the arrangements are like the rule of thirds, having an odd number like we've already talked about, and the compositions, which we've already talked about. Another thing that you can use to make and arrange things within your photograph is your depth of field. Some people want everything to be spot on, tack sharp from front to back. I kind of like when there's things out of focus in photographs, and a lot of my macros do that, which means I never win macro contests because everyone thinks that it has to be in focus from front to back. But I like some of my macros because there is out of focus parts to it, and that's my taste. And the other thing that can add to a photograph is the mood. The darkness, the lightness, the colors that are used within the photograph, and we'll talk more about that later. And then camera angle can make or break a photograph or picture. Next thing I want to, first we're going to talk about one versus multiple items. So here you have one item, even though there's also water in it, but it's all about the strawberry in this photograph. So it's interesting for that one item. Here I have a pair of items, but it doesn't detract because you have them connected in some way. And then a found object that I found in Williamsburg that is vertical, but also has all these items that are intermixed and show a lot of different variety to it. So you can start with one item, you can add to it, you can subtract, you can go as far as you want to go with it. Any questions? Okay, depth of field. Here, this is almost a landscape, but it's not because it's all bottles, but you're sharp from front to back. So you have a wide depth of field. You can do that. It doesn't detract from the photograph. It's really good. Here you have a macro shot. That to me is really good because you have the photographer in front of a camera lens, and it's a still life because it's a representation of a person. It's not a real, it's still an inanimate object. You have to understand that not every judge is going to accept a macro shot as a still life. To me, it is because if it's an inanimate object, it meets the definition. So it's up to the judge whether they throw it out. So do at your own risk, but understand that some people do consider macro to be still lifes. And you can always photo stack, which is taking multiple images and stack the image that you can do in Photoshop, Photomatix. There are a lot of different programs that you can stack images in.
Christine, you're talking about not Photomatix. It was I can't remember what the software was, but the focus stacking. You have a great program. I don't know if it was last year or the year before, but if you do a search on our Facebook and our YouTube page for macro, Christine gave us an amazing presentation talking about all that stuff.
It was April or May of 2020. So when we first went virtual, that was one of the programs I did whenever we were early on. I was supposed to do, So if people want to see how to do the focus stacking, I go step by step how to do it in that presentation. But that's a small part of what this is about. Just know you can do it. If you want to know better how to do it, find the macro presentation I did 2 years ago.
Lewis in the chat saved us. Helicon Focus.
Helicon Focus, that's it. The next thing that you can use is your camera angle. This is the same subject, different angles. Some people will like the flat presentation. Some people will like the more angled, more from above presentation. But you can see how even the exact same subject can totally change the way you view it just from changing your angle. I could have even gone more sharp and looked straight down on it and done a more flat photograph. It's all up to you how you want to present the item that you're photographing. Okay, types of still life photography. Tabletop, which we have a good chance to do stuff with in 2 weeks whenever we have our tabletop night. My focus is going to be on hopefully tabletop still lifes. Anyone who wants to bring in the lighting or set something up for that, please let me know, and I will appreciate anyone helping out with that. And it's a station where everyone that comes that night can bring their camera to and walk around and take photographs at. The next type of still life photography is product photography. So as JC brought up, that is a type of still life photography. There's also food photography, which is very closely related to product photography, and sometimes some people would consider it a type of product photography. And there's found object photography, which whenever you go out and about and you're roaming around this beautiful world we live in, you can find things set up by other people. But you don't want to just photograph things without making it your own. Find your own angle, your own lighting source. You can still make it your own, but still photograph it in such a way that it's interesting. The first type is tabletop, which my s'more here is a perfect example of tabletop. It's simple, it's on a tabletop, and I made it more interesting by putting it on a reflective surface. But You can do this with almost any object, and you can do it the angled, you can do it the straight on from the side. It's all up to you. You can add tablecloth, you can add placemats. There's different things you can do to make it. And then there's product photography. And this shows you that you can turn product photography and still make it interesting and still present it. This also shows you that you can do more than just present the whole item. This tells you as much about the product as this one does. It's just a different way of photographing it. So look at an item and see what you can do to make it your own. And like this one, I have the toothbrush laying in the front of it. That was actually from one of our, during COVID when we were doing the things in the bathroom. That was one of the items that I photographed as one of our assignments. But it still presents the products to you. Next is food photography. It's related to product, and the goal is to make the food look good. Remember, the goal is to make the food look good, not to eat it. A lot of people think that after they do food photography, they have to eat it. The problem is sometimes what you have to do to the food to make it look really good, you don't want to eat it afterwards. I know that this hamburger had a lot of toothpicks in it. There was some glycerin that was used on this mushroom to make it glossy and shiny. And, you know, sponges to hold it up? I don't think there were sponges to hold it up, and I know it bothered John that the clear front wasn't in focus, but I liked that, you know, the front of the hamburger was in focus. Again, it's people's tastes. I could have probably tried to focus stack this, but I think this was early on when I was learning photography from John, so I don't think I was as good at some of that type of thing yet. The other thing you have to keep in mind is that whenever you're setting up lighting for food photography, sometimes the lights can melt it. You have to find ways to make it like an ice cold drink look ice cold, but it's not necessarily ice cold. Ice cream melts. So we've done photo shoots where we took powdered sugar and mixed it just right to make it look like ice cream, and we were able to scoop it out and it looked just like ice cream on the ice cream cone. But you know, there are certain tricks that you can find in food photography books that make it look like what you want it to be, but it's not necessarily that. The next type of photography is found photography. This first photograph is from Williamsburg in the, I think it's the apothecary house. And, you know, I found it like this. This photograph is from the Eastman House up in New York. The whole wall of the Technicolor colors that I could have spent all day photographing that wall because it was just so fascinating to me, and I kept finding different shots that I thought were interesting. I have the whole wall, which is interesting, but and if you saw the digital contest, you might have seen my photograph of, she didn't like that I was looking up at it, but that to me was what made the photograph. So that it was at an angle that was different than straight on. So, you know, it's your image, and just remember that even when you're doing contests, you may not agree with people's input on it. Listen to it. I'm not saying they're wrong. Maybe you'll learn something from it. Maybe you'll learn what people like. But, you know, it's your photography. Find your sight and your view of looking at the world, and don't let it get you down when people go out because it's from below. Yeah. The next thing we're going to talk about is what do you need to take photographs. It can be very simple. You don't have to have an elaborate setup. But, of course, you need a camera. You can have a full frame camera or a crop sensor. You do have to keep in mind that the full frame is going to help you whenever it comes to, you're going to zoom in more with a crop sensor. It's going to be more, the full frame is not going to,
Shallower depth of field.
it's going to have a shallower depth of field than the crop sensor. So whenever you have, your aperture is going to have to maybe be different depending on the type of camera you're using.
You can't use a cell phone? Oh. You can't use a cell phone?
You can use a cell phone.
Because there's some cell phones out there that are really, really good.
You can use a cell phone, but it's still a camera in a cell phone. The lenses you use will also change the way your photographs look. Macro lenses are going to let you zoom in more, but you're going to have that shallower depth of field. Zoom lenses can cause chromatic aberrations. With the telephotos, they can help you because your perspective compression may be something you want in the photograph. So it's something to keep in mind that you'll have to be a lot further away from your subject when you're using a telephoto lens. Wide angle could cause distortion because of the way the curvature of the lens. Tilt shift can come in handy with product photography because you can get those angles just right to keep the whole thing in focus or to tilt it to get it different parts out of focus. But it's an expensive lens, so that tends to be a disadvantage of the tilt shift. But again, you can do the focus stacking to get the whole thing in focus, so you don't need to do the expensive side of things. You're also going to need a tripod. Not always, but it's going to help you set up a scene, and especially if you're shooting serial things, if you're doing focus stacking, you're going to have a tripod. It's the only way you're going to be able to do it. You're also going to want a shutter release or a remote timer, or use the remote timer, because you're not going to want to push the button and shake your camera and have that affect your photograph. The shutter release allows you to stand back and just hit it, or the timer allows you to hit it and step back before the shutter goes down. And then lighting, we're going to go into the lighting more in depth here.
Christine, can you explain a little bit more about the background compression between a wide angle and a telephoto lens? Why is that necessary? Why is that good for still life or product photography?
The background compression can, whenever you're standing back from it, you can arrange it on the table. I'm trying to get the right words for it.
I know you know it.
Whenever you arrange your items on the table, sometimes you don't want it to look like it's really spread out, but it helps you make it look less cluttered, but you want to compress the images together. So whenever you have a longer telephoto lens, you can get back, and the way it works to do that, the photo looks more compressed whenever you take the photo from further back.
So you're actually bringing that background into close, you're bringing that background in.
Yeah, it's compressing the image.
You can make the background look real big too.
You can do the opposite too, right? You can take your shot and have the background look a lot larger. Yes, absolutely. Next, we're going to talk about light. There's many different types of lighting that you can use. Of course, there's natural, which would be sunlight. There's artificial light, which you can have hot lights, which are on all the time, or you can have cold lights, which are flashes. There's disadvantages to both. Hot lights are exactly that. They can get really hot. So if you leave them on, you can burn yourself on them. If you get too close to them, they can melt your subject or cause wilting. But they're on all the time, and you can see where the shadows are on your items. You can see exactly what you see is what you get pretty much. So you know what you're going to get. Cold lights with flashes, you may not know exactly how the shadows are going to come out whenever you use them. But that's where you can use modeling lights, which gives you a better idea, at least to some extent, so that you can have an idea of where the shadows are going to land. So that's why they came up with those later on. You can also have rim lighting, which is putting the light behind the object and getting the nice, beautiful rim of the subject, which I don't have any examples of, but I love rim lighting. It can come in handy and really display items really well. The first thing you have to keep in mind is the harshness of the shadows. Some people like harsh shadows, and depending on the subject, they can really add to the photograph. If you have the sun and that's your only source of light, you're gonna and it's going to be pretty harsh if you're in direct sunlight. Anyone tell me why it's going to be harsh if you're in direct sunlight?
Because it's so far away.
You have a small light source. Even though the sun's huge, it's still a small light source. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're using artificial lights. If you want harsh shadows, if you put your light further away, you're going to have harsher shadows. If you move it closer, you're going to have softer shadows. You can use soft boxes or umbrellas to help diffuse your light to give you less harsh shadows, or to take your shadows away if that's really what you want to do, depending on your positioning of things. You can use reflectors to feather in light to, make the image evenly lit, or you can have the brighter light where the light is and feather the reflector just right to just put enough light in there that it's not in harsh shadows. And then where your flashes are will also come into play on how your image turns out, so that you need to sit and think about where the shadows are coming across. So let's go into some examples. These are both natural light. You can see the harsh shadows in the bright sunlight here around the shell. And but this isn't overexposed because you can see all the whites and you can see the bubbles. Here, I think it was a pretty cloudy day, so you have a lot less shadows, but you have a nice, evenly diffuse, lighted set of pumpkins and gourds.
John, did you use what kind of lens did you use?
Fred asked me, Christine was kind enough to use some of my images, but Fred asked me about the image on the left. What were you saying, what kind of lens I used? Oh, that was probably like 24 to 70. That was probably wide. I remember getting real low and real close and almost drowning my lens and my camera a couple times.
Looks nice.
Then we're going to talk about artificial light. Again, I got an example from John and my own. Can anyone tell me which direction the light is coming from in any of these?
I would think it's overhead, but might be a little bit off.
This one, I believe he had a light to the front.
Overhead probably is right.
Overhead? Yeah. Okay. For this one, the light's over here. You can tell on the jelly beans, but there was probably a reflector over here. If you look, there's a slight one on that side, but a harsher one on this side. So we have the light coming in from both sides, but a little stronger from the right.
Check the shadows out. The shadow with the highlights on it, that's telling you something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This was probably with white light. Both of these were probably with white lightnings in the studio with soft boxes on.
And Doug chimes in on the chat, and he says he was correct. The second one, the one with the jelly beans, is from your main source light is from the right, for sure.
And then another type of light you can have is a light box. These are pretty evenly lit. We have LED lights that go to the sides and evenly light down on it. The advantage of these is you get a more infinity-like background because we pull down the plastic that we put behind it, and you get pretty even lighting on everything. And then light direction. This is natural light inside a tavern that the light was coming in from this side. So you only have one-sided side of light. I admit I did darken it a little bit, but I liked the moodiness of the darkness. But this side is in shadows, but it's still present, and you can see the whole thing. But you can think about how harsh your shadows are going to be. As I said, this was inside of a restaurant, and the light was coming in from the side and from the windows. The next thing we're going to talk about is go ahead.
I was just going to say one thing about the lighting. No, earlier you was talking about Rembrandt lighting, and
yes.
I've always heard Rembrandt lighting referred to as cross lighting. So, anyone ever heard that?
Yes.
About cross lighting and Rembrandt lighting being about the same thing?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, then good. Right. I'm looking at that picture right there. It's a typical example of cross lighting to me.
The next type of lighting we're going to talk about is high key and low key, which you can use on objects just like you can use on people. First, you have high key. This is a very high key item. And to know high key or low key, you basically look at your histogram on your camera or in Photoshop. And on high key, you're going to be pushed to the right. On low key, you're going to be pushed to the left. So your highlights or your shadows are going to be what stands out the most. I don't shoot too many high key items, but I really like it whenever I do get some. And then this is low key. I zoomed in on that table with all the bottles, but you still have the darkness, but you still have the items very present in the photograph. But it's still very dark and moody and brings you into the shadows.
Christine, do you have any thoughts on using high key and low key in Renaissance eras and what the moods might be of that?
Gonna get into that in a minute.
Okay, sorry.
Moods isn't yet. But yes, you can use your lighting and your darkness to bring out moods, but I'm gonna go into that in a minute. The next thing we're going to talk about are different types of backgrounds you can use. You can have an infinity background, which can be basically any color you want, but you can't see the seams. It's just the same color all around. You can't see where the background is exactly. And then you have tabletop, reflective, related, and unrelated compositions. So let's show you some examples. This is a perfect infinity background. You can't see where it's sitting. You can't see where the crease is in the back. It's just all even all around. You can't see where the item is exactly in relation to its surroundings. And then you have tabletop. I reused images. I had them. This is a perfect, of course, tabletop image. Reflective, you have the reflection underneath it that helps enhance the photograph and keeps you in the image. And then for me, these are related. Seashells belong on the sand at the ocean. So to me, that's a related background. To me, this is also a related background, which I had to explain to John, because you have your head brace, which is part of the process that was used to make the photograph. These this was a wet plate that he made. So that pulls in the process that was used, and the way it pulls together, to me, was a related background. The whole story is told by the entire picture and the process that it was made with. Any questions? And then to me, this is unrelated. You have this box here that is totally unrelated to the rest of the picture, but my eye is pulled to the pink because it's so different from the rest of the background. But, you know, it kind of stands out. It's different. Although the green of the fork also complements everything in the photograph, but it's unrelated because the whole picture doesn't necessarily, it wouldn't necessarily be where your brain would put it. To me, it's related but unrelated. You have the different colors that you can crush used to make different colors for pastel paints, but you have all the different colors and you're only using one. So to me, it was unrelated because of the colors. Now we'll talk about mood. How can you add mood to a photograph? The first thing is colors that you use. The colors that are within your photograph can speak about different things. Red can be anything from lust to romance, defiance and anger. Anxiety can be shown in red. Yellow can be daring and innocence, exuberance, caution, and it can also help pull out the idealistic side of a photograph. Blue can be melancholy, cold, passive. To me, it's also sadness and, and depression. Orange can be warmth, naivety, also can be romantic or exotic. It can also be toxic. Green can be ambivalence, vitality, health, poison. So you have two exact opposites, but when you think of green, you think of the green apple that Snow White ate that poisoned her, or the healthy green of the outdoors in the forests and such. So you can use it to kind of bring out two different sides of the same thing. It can also be ominous or corrupt if you use the darker greens, whenever you set something up, if you want to bring out the corruption in things, you can have the green money standing there, different things that you can use to pull out the story you're trying to tell. Purple can be illusion, fantasy. And if you think about history, purple was for royalty. So because it was such a hard color to make, it was a hard color to get, so only the royalty were the ones to wear it. It can also be mystical, but it can also be ominous or ethereal. You can also add mood by having brightness versus darkness. The different lights you use, the harshness of your shadows can bring mood into a photograph. Anyone else have any other things they use to bring mood into a photograph? Have you ever thought about it before?
I use a lot of indirect but very narrow light. So I control my light. So I use scrims, I make my own scrims, but then I'll put like little cutouts to kind of like give a hint of something, but it could be like very subtle, it could be in the way back, where you might have to look for it, but that really sometimes brings out like what's going on. There shouldn't be light over there. So it's kind of like a mystery of things to have different types of shapes going around in your, and with the lenses, you can also put bokeh lenses on as an added feature.
Right.
Does anybody else call those cutout shaped cookies, or am I just hungry? You should know, Fred.
What's that?
Cookies.
They're over there.
What I'm saying is when you actually have you can actually cut things out to project those lights. and I've always known them as being referred to as cookies.
Oh.
But that's something interesting. David Hobby, who we had here several years ago, he liked to use a lot of those like weird antique glass blocks and project light through them as well, which is very similar to what you were saying. That's interesting.
Yeah, like old glass, like I use stained glass a lot for background, because you can really kind of like get it, kind of like, bizarre, like, why is it this color? Or they would, the rondelles, antique windows, they're made with rondelles, which is a blown glass or spun glass, and it's basically flat, but it's not, because it's really hard to create. But again, it's another type of way of, we're getting an old Fresnel lens and putting that on top of the light.
Gotcha. Doug says fog or mist as well, broken beams of light, and Doug used to call them gobos or pattern. I've heard of gobos before, but I'm a portly gentleman. I like cookies better.
It's a theater term.
Another thing you can, for lighting that you want to keep in mind, whenever we want different colors in our photographs in the studio, we put a black background down instead of a white. Whenever we use white with our gels on our flashes and such, it comes out washed out. Black really reflects light so much better than white does. So you get much brighter, more vibrant colors when you have a black background. The next thing I wanted to talk about was movement. This is still life, so why are we talking about movement within it? This is something, again, that not all judges might accept, but it is a growing topic within the still life community that to have something that could be movement. This is one of John's photographs that he put together that shows the movement of the flower being turned around, but it was the bottle and the rows were on a platform, and he stacked it together with it spinning around, right?
Don't give away my secrets.
But the shell shows movement because of the wave coming up. And I remember him getting that photo. He was literally lying on the sand trying to get well, he might not have been lying. He was holding the camera down with his screen showing up at him, getting the photograph. But it was right next to that shell. And then you have the water movement with the strawberry, but it doesn't make them any less still lifes. The French call a still life that contains motion nature morte, which means dead nature. So it is a growing theme within the still life community to do this. Some of the examples I saw online included taking an object and moving it like a car and having it blurred and photo stacking it next to the car not moving, so that you kind of had the combination of the two.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Way in the background, is that foam or is that clouds back there?
That's clouds. That's at the ocean, on the beach in Chincoteague, and those are all clouds.
Okay, that was kind of stopping me for a while there, yeah.
Yeah, it was a beautiful cloudy day.
Yeah.
The clouds were perfect for us that day.
Yep.
But as you see, there can be movement within still lifes, but again, use it at your own risk. Not all judges are going to accept that, since it's supposed to be inanimate objects. But it is growing within the communities that do still life, that there can be something to show movement. Light painting was also mentioned in several of the resources I looked at.
But it's still inanimate.
Sorry.
I said it's still an inanimate object.
Right.
You know, that shell's not going anywhere. It's dead. You
Right.
know?
The last thing I want to say, and I have a bunch of things I can add in here. Be creative with what you do with your photographs. Mix things up. Mix in colors. Mix old and new items together to, show the history of things. Have many versus few within an object. Start with one item, photograph it, add another item in, see what you can do with that. have items that could stand alone, like a bowl, but then have a bowl full of cherries with a couple in front of it so that you have many versus a few. There are different things you can do to pull things together within your photographs. Contrast items, have black with white items, have plain and patterned items. There are different things you can do to add interest and to pull people's eyes into your photograph. Arrange the items. The arrangement makes or breaks the still life. So you know, it could be in a straight line, but that might not be as interesting as having layers, as you saw in some of the original paintings we were looking at. There were a lot of items in there, but they were still interesting because your eye kind of guided around. But find a way to keep the eye moving. Those curves helped keep your eye moving around and circling back. You can use leading lines to the items you want to stand out the most. Layer the photographs. Sometimes simple is best. Too many objects can detract, but see if you can tell a story. See if what you can do with those inanimate objects to bring them to life. Any questions?
That's Christine. Thank you so much, Christine. Let me grab the microphone from you there. That was a really great presentation that really nailed home not only shoot a still life, but tell a story and to try to make it something more just a snap on a camera. With that, if Christine, you can get ready to hit number 9, that'll close us out. Do we have anything else before we close out for tonight? No? Well, I'm going to officially close the meeting. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, everybody, for visiting us online. We hope to see you soon. And with that, I'll say good night. Good night.